coming to you live from lovely Seattle at the Cloud Fair here. I'm here with Christopher Brown. Christopher, how are you doing?
Good, so far.
Good. So you're the CTO of Opscode.
Yes.
And you just gave a talk. Can you just give a high-level sort of summary of what you talked about?
Sure. So obviously in the cloud space, there are two dissenting factions right now. There's infrastructure as a service and platform as a service. I'm obviously an infrastructure as a service guy. I was one of the guys who designed EC2. My current company, Opscode, builds APIs basically on top of infrastructure as a service. So I have this contention that the current platform folks are sort of doing it wrong. I think there's a gap between. I think platform's a great idea. I just think maybe we're not quite where we should be at this point.
And you talked about, was it artifacts that you were talking about? What was the word that you used?
Primitives.
Primitives. I knew it was something like that. But I think of primitive artifacts. Never mind.
There we go.
So explain primitives.
Sure. This notion that you build up pieces of functionality that are easy to describe, singular in purpose, singular in intent, easy to debug, easy to reason about. So if you look at things that Amazon has built, their primitives would be things like compute in EC2, storage in S3, then a number of other services. Opscode, we provide primitives around configuration management, app deployment, and orchestration. Now that's not so different when you think about the entire bag of things that go into something like platform as a service, but the real difference is in the platform, you get to the set that they offer you. There are constraints there, there's policy around it, and typically those things are tightly coupled together. Now at the end of it, if it isn't exactly what a customer wants, there's no choice. They're done. They have to go elsewhere.
So how would that reconcile when you were doing a bit of walking down memory lane in computer history with things like service-oriented architecture or object-oriented programming?
Sure.
This modular sort of vision seems to be something we've heard before.
Absolutely, and I like to talk about it from sort of a math perspective of composability, where you can put these pieces together. You can reason about what happens if you compose something about security on top of automation. We have heard in the past a lot about modular design. This is in some sense the next generation after service-oriented architecture. A lot of the same principles are there. The notion that a service performs a particular kind of functionality. You might have a service right next door to it that does something completely different. So it's not a complete departure, but I would say it's an evolution.
Cool. And now, the components that you guys talk about for your product are cookbooks and recipes. Now, what's the difference between those, and then how do they relate back to AMI, something you may know a little bit about?
Yeah, there we go. So, in the chef parlance, recipe is a unit that goes into a cookbook. So just the metaphor holds. Recipes in cookbooks. Recipes have resources inside them. So any little granular thing that you change about a system, there's a resource involved. So there may be file resources, service resources, and then those are built up in a recipe that's got some expected outcome. That recipe might be about databases. So you might be installing a database, you might be configuring a database client. Those recipes go into a cookbook. Your cookbook may be the database cookbook. The recipe may be for a client. The recipe may be for a server. So these all build up. Resources inside of a recipe, recipes inside of cookbooks. Where it gets interesting in something like infrastructure as a service and AMIs on something like Amazon is this tension between baking it all into the AMI or actually performing those actions in a recipe at runtime. There's a real spectrum in there. There's a spectrum of choice. So for the things that are directly germane to a particular customer, perhaps your application, things that need to be built on the end systems, quite often you're going to want to put that into a recipe. You do the deployment through the recipe. Over time, you watch the rate of change of those components, and you say, I'm spending a bunch of time installing a thing that doesn't change. Maybe I'll just bake that into the AMI. And over time, that's where the needle moves. All that is to say, I would not actually recommend churning a new API every time you change a few bits. I was one of the guys who designed the AMI format, and while I like the notion of shareable AMIs, I don't like the notion of sprawl and the need to upload and register an AMI on every change. It's just not necessary.
And then just to end with, DevOps, big buzzword these days, and something that Opscode's gotten behind quite a bit. Can you just give your sort of snippet on what you think it's all about and where you think Opscode plays?
Absolutely. It's kind of funny. Internally, this comes up quite often because a couple of the other founders, Jesse and Adam, are definitely ops guys, and I'm definitely a dev guy. And we all came to the same conclusions along different paths. Opscode internally functions, as you would expect, deeply from the DevOps culture in that our developers and our operations folks are a part of the same team. They're a part of the same on-call rotation. The developers don't do deployments without the operations guys knowing. And notice I said the developers doing deployments. The dev guys and the ops guys are always together. The ops guys, when something goes wrong and they get paged, they're not expected to be on the hook alone. There's a good chance one of the developers is going to get paged right down the line from that. So, it's hand in glove all the time.
Excellent. Christopher Brown, thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you.